One thing I really understand whilst building my business is that quite simply, my time is my most scarce resource. It's finite and we never get that back. Today, I want to be sharing with you my lessons that I've learned on how successful people manage their time and how I question myself in being effective in terms of managing my own time. So stay tuned. Right, if you don't know who I am, my name is Thomas Parkinson and I've been selling on Amazon now for 4 years. Now, quite simply, I have multiple businesses and multiple team members, and managing my time is super important. So this is a video that I've created for my own personal learning and something that's close to my heart. Now, even as an Amazon seller, I think this is going to add value to you in building your business and obviously building your team. So enough about me, what are we going to go through today? Okay, so what are we going to go through today? Well, first things first, number one, I'm going to go through a little bit of background behind my story and where I'm coming from for this video. Now, number two, I will share with you why it is important to think about managing your time. And then finally, number three, I'm going to share with you the 10 lessons I've learned about how CEOs manage their time. Let's get into it now. Okay, so first things first, the backstory. Where am I coming from in regards to this video? Now, there is a saying that success leaves clues. And quite recently, I stumbled across an article titled How CEOs Manage Time. Now, this was a study by the Harvard Business School, and what I'll do is I'll drop a link to the article below. Now, I thought if I can use this information and learn from these CEOs, I can further my online selling business. Why? Because I've got a team of VAs who I spend time with, and I'd also like to know where I should be focusing my time on. And if I can allocate my time properly, as the CEOs do, then obviously I can spend my time in the right areas and get great results. Now, you might be asking where this information came from. Well, in the report that I dropped the link down below, they basically took 27 CEOs from top companies and they measured what they were doing with their time 24/7 for 13 weeks. Now, to give you some quick stats, these companies, the CEOs that they managed, generated an average annual revenue of $13.1 billion each. So these are some pretty top and impressive CEOs. Hence why it's very interesting to understand how they spend their time and what I can learn from them. Now that leads me quite nicely onto why is this important? Well, I talked about it before, but quite simply, if I can learn how successful people manage their time, and I can look at how I'm managing my time, maybe I can start to see where things are different. And as a result, I can start changing the way I manage my time, and then I can learn from them and do things better. The result of this, I could probably and hopefully emulate their success and hopefully their company's success as well. Now, it's not that I'm going to do exactly the same as them. There might be differences between what I'm doing and what top CEOs are doing. And I can then understand what could I learn, or at least question why I'm doing things so differently, and as a result, change my own processes and improve my business. Now, what I want to do now is to talk through this information and what I've learned from it, and to put it into context as you as an Amazon seller or an online seller, and to support you in how maybe you allocate your time. So let me go through it now. Okay, that leads me nicely onto the 10 lessons that I've learned about how CEOs manage their time. So before I begin, there is just a big caveat that I'll add to this. Don't look at these numbers and try adding them up to make 100%. A lot of these are based on percentages. Why? Because you're gonna find errors. Now, what you're gonna try and understand is this is about averages. So they might not add up perfectly, i.e. to 100%, but what you're going to do is get a good feeling of what's going on in their time allocation, and what that's going to do is help you understand if you are doing the same thing or maybe you are not. And then you can ask the simple question, why? Why am I different? Now, there must be a reason why these CEOs are spending so much of their time in these certain areas, not because they're stupid, but because these areas are providing the most effective results. Quite simply, what we want to learn from them is not looking for the errors in the data, but for the things that are different from what we're doing. And obviously then we can ask the question, why? Okay, so for the first thing that I learned, what I'll do is highlight that the job is all consuming. Now it says in the article, it says that leaders in the study, these CEOs, they worked on average 9.7 hours per weekday. Now they also conducted business on 79% of the weekends and put an average of 3.9 hours per day in on weekends. Now in addition to this, they said that 70% of the CEOs were also working on their vacation or holiday days. They averaged 2.4 hours per day. So looking at these figures, you can see it's just a relentless job, and at the top, they are working non-stop. So to recap quite simply what hours CEOs work: 10 hours a day on weekdays, 4 hours a day on weekends, and even 3 hours a day on average during their holidays. So quite a lot of work there. So basically, while we understand there is a lot going on and they're even working a lot of hours, this is despite delegating a lot of tasks to their teams. They will still spend a lot of time with their teams and provide direction, create alignment, win support, and gather information needed to make good decisions for their business. Now, this leads me nicely onto my second learning from this information. Now, next is making time for personal well-being. Now, CEOs slept on average 6.9 hours per night, and many had regular exercise regimes which consumed about 9% of their non-working hours, or roughly 45 minutes a day. Now, I strongly agree with this because exercise allows you to sustain work and whatever you are doing. Now, in my case, I use exercise to take a break from work, but also to think, listen, and learn about things that are going to help me out. Maybe listening to a podcast to get my mind out of the day-to-day business whilst at the gym is a really helpful thing that I do. Now, what I will add is that CEOs spend about 25% of their time not working. So they are doing something else other than sleeping and working. Now, this equates to roughly 6 hours a day, and half of those hours are spent with their families. And what a lot of them have learned is to become very disciplined in defining that time and spending it with their loved ones and their families. Now, most CEOs have also found at least some hours, 2.1 on average, for some downtime, which might include everything from, say, watching some television or reading for pleasure, or even hobbies like photography, which I really like because, hey, I love photography too. Now, if you think about it, how they allocate their day, they're spending on average 10 hours a day working, 7 hours a day sleeping, 3 hours a day with family, and about 2.1 hours of downtime, and 1 hour doing something else, which might be, let's call it gym, something like that, exercise. Okay, so now we've gone through a breakdown of their whole hours. We're looking at a typical 24-hour day. What I want to talk about now is just what they're doing within their working days, within those working hours, and how much time they spend with each activity. Now, that leads me on to point number 3. The first activity that I'll go through is working face-to-face. CEOs spend on average 61% of their working hours doing face-to-face interaction. Now, the one thing which I'd like to highlight is that face-to-face interaction is super important. Even in our online business, which is remote work, I make a really big point to get time to spend with my team having face-to-face one-to-one Skype calls. It's super important. Now, the article further states that CEOs understand the importance of that by having face-to-face contact because it exerts influence. In our case, having Skype calls is the best way to exert my influence on the team and also learning what's really going on and to delegate work to move forward on different agendas. To simply put it, emailing doesn't have the same effect. Now, what I would add is that face-to-face time gives a signal that this is important. This is something important that I'm working on, which people subconsciously understand, and most CEOs recognize this. So for your staff might be thinking, if you're sending an email, it might not be as important as something, or it might not be so urgent as when you're trying to have a face-to-face meeting. This signifies that something is important, hence why they put so much focus on having face-to-face contact. Now, this leads me nicely on to number 4. The next lesson is what CEOs have learned: avoiding the lure of emails. CEOs understand they shouldn't get involved in operational email. Now, if I'm talking about my Amazon business, I understand how to source and I understand how to run my business. But if I'm CC'd on emails about sourcing or other parts of my business, they could be answered by me or they could be answered by my team. Now, if I answer these emails, then what am I saying? I'm telling my team that by answering this email, I should probably be answering all the emails that are coming in about sourcing, about operations, about shipments. And that is telling them that they should not be doing it. Even if I don't say that, my actions as much are saying because I'm doing the action. When I see a problem, what I try to do is not to deal with that specific problem, but what I'm going to do is make a framework to support my staff in solving not only that problem, but also the same types of problems going forward in the future. Quite simply, I'm trying to support them in solving all the problems without me by creating frameworks. Now, in addition to this, it says emails from CEOs can create a downward spiral of unnecessary communication and set the wrong norms, especially if the CEO sends them late at night, on weekends, or even on holiday. Now, for me, in my business, I usually communicate at night since most of my employees are from the Philippines, and you know what? I'm in Mexico, the other side of the world. So it's not always possible for me to communicate on the same time zone. But what I do is I set the expectation that I won't expect my staff to get back to me at night or weekends, and only when they're back at work. I'd also add that in my business, that if I see my staff working on weekends or non-working hours, then I'm going to ask them why they're working. And what I'm trying to look for is to see if I can spot problems, i.e., do they feel like they're expected to work, which is outside their normal hours. Really, I want them to be working the hours they're here to do a great job, not feel like they're working all the time. Now, number 5, CEOs are agenda driven. And with the abundant work they have, the article says that they should have an explicit personal agenda, and most do. Now, a clear and effective agenda optimizes the CEO's limited time. Without one, demands from the loudest people can take over, and the most important work won't get done. Now, in my case, we are still doing the road to 1 million that I talked about at the beginning of this video. Now, my sub-agenda on that, and my agenda that I push with my purchasing manager, is that I want him to spend £20,000 a week. Now, I'll ask him to continue that £20,000 spend until we get to £100,000 in revenue. Now, after that, what I'll do is I'll ask him to keep driving the revenue forward, but I'll ask him to improve the margin. So right now, don't worry about the margin, just make the spend, but once we get the spend, then drive the margin. What I'm really clear about with my purchasing manager is what he should be focusing on every single week. And right now, beginning with revenue first, through buying more, and then once he achieves that, drive the margin. What I will add to that is CEOs invest a significant amount of time, 43% on average, in activities that further their own agendas. So what does this look like for me in my business? Now, I have additional meetings whereby we talk about that agenda, addressing what I'm trying to push forward and what's going on and how we are getting there. And quite simply, how can I support my team, which is super, super important. Now, the report talked about time devoted to the core agenda, and this ranged from anything from 14 to 80% of the leader's working hours. So something quite important there that I can certainly relate to. Now, for me, my core agenda is I have a meeting and I discuss the stats, but I'm also thinking about where do I push next. And this changes throughout the year. It might be for Christmas, we're focusing on ramping up spend, getting into Christmas stocks. For February, it could be Valentine's Day purchasing. It could even be, should we say, changing the repricer, getting that working, or even focusing on doing bulk orders from our suppliers, or even something as simple as increasing our average order size from £100 up to £200. And that's something we've done recently as well. Now, I'm going to be crystal clear about it and focus my team on driving towards those steps that are going to also help me towards those bigger goals. That is my agenda, and I'm going to work with my team and push that agenda to help us towards our bigger goal. Now, this leads me on to number 6, and the next one, which is in dealing with unfolding developments. Now, it's said in the report that 36% of their time, working hours, remember, was spent on reactive mode, handling unfolding events as they happen. Now, this means they spend 30% of their time doing day-to-day stuff. But for me, I spend way less than that, since in my Amazon business, it's pretty simple and it's a one-way business and we don't really have to speak to customers. So it's not too challenging. Now, moving on, most of the CEOs, 89% in fact, spent time on crisis, although only 1% of their working hours was actually spent on crisis during the quarter. So crisis mode. Now, if we talk about what does this mean for me, and I've talked about it before in previous videos, I've shared the dark side of Amazon with our crisis. Now, this is whereby our payments account was suspended and we were unable to take money out of our business. Now, this was back in November 2020, and about 1% of my quarter was spent on this, which isn't huge, but we do have these crises in our business, and a small amount of our time is represented by that. The same as CEOs in Fortune or in the big companies. Now, the seventh thing is next, limiting our routine responsibilities. CEOs in top companies spend about 11% of their working time on average doing routine duties. Now, I must admit that I spend maybe too much time doing routine tasks, but I'm always looking to reduce this down. Now, I will add that they say the ability of a CEO to control what we term have to do was also quite variable. Now, in my business, there's going to be plenty of routine duties, although I'm always asking myself if I should be doing this, is it helping me, and trying to keep time spent on have to do tasks to an absolute minimum. Now, that leads me on to number 8. It says here, CEOs are always in meetings. Now, they say 72% of their total time is spent in meetings, and I can definitely agree with that. I spend most of my time doing meetings with my team. Although what I've learned from this is that making meetings shorter and more effective is super important. Now, the article says CEOs confirm that a 1 hour meeting could often be cut down to 30 minutes or even 15 minutes, which I can really understand. Now, I won't lie, I have meetings that I've booked for an hour, but I could do in maybe 15 or 30 minutes, so certainly an area for me to improve in. Now, number 9 is something which I really agree with, and this is the amount of time that CEOs spend alone. Put it simply, they said here 28% of their work was spent alone on average. And it was interesting to know that in order to capitalize on it, CEOs should avoid traveling with an entourage. So basically, CEOs should avoid traveling with other people because they need time to think. And that is an important thing because they are so caught up doing so many things that they need to stop and make time to think, digest, and plan the next steps. Certainly something which I know I need to do more in my business, get out the day-to-day, take time to reflect, and then think about going forward. Now, this leads me nicely onto my final 10th top tip that I've learned from this. This is about finding time for customers, which is just about 3% on average for most CEOs. And I agree that even with FastTrackFBA, I don't spend enough time with you guys, my customers and my viewers, and I could certainly do more than that. Now, what I'll do is I'll give you a brief recap of the information on how CEOs manage their time. And what I've highlighted are, quite simply, CEOs spend on average 6 hours a day not working, of which 3 hours a day is with their family. CEOs are very agenda driven. Remember, 43% of the time is spent working on their agendas. They let people know what their agenda is, which I think is super important. Remember, communication, 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 and all I need to do is more of that. And in their working hours, they spend about 36% of the time reactive, 1% of the time on crisis, and 11% of the time on routine. Now, of their 43% of their agenda time, they further break this down into 21% of the time spent on strategy, 25% is on functional and business unit reviews, 25% is on developing people and relationships, and I love that, and then 16% spent on matching organizational structure and culture of the needs of the business, and roughly about 4% on other things. Now, they also understand that they need alone time, and they know that they need to reduce down meeting times that are expanded to fill their time slots. Now, I said it earlier and I'll say it again, it is important to communicate your agendas with your team. You can have a monthly presentation and deliver what you want to focus on for this period of time. Remember, what you focus your time on is what your business focuses its time on. You are the business. Now, if you want to be more productive whilst running your Amazon business, I was sharing a video around here about what time boxing is and how you can use time boxing to manage your business more effectively, just like Elon Musk. And this is something that I do in my business. So check that out. Now, what I will say is hopefully you've liked this video, give me a big thumbs up. And hey, if you want to see more like this, hit that subscribe button. Obviously, it's just going to notify you when new videos come out. But for me, Thomas Parkinson and FastTrackFBA, thank you very much.